Okay guys, at this point in the course, all of you should know the difference between strategy and tactics. And this lesson is to reinforce that idea of how strategy is going to ultimately take us to the point in the game where we need to define, we need to decide it with a tactic. And for those of you who are new to the channel, basically strategy has to do with the question, what do we do, right? So you evaluate the position using what we learned on lesson 138, and then you come up with a plan. Now, tactics has to do with once you understand what you need to do or what you want to do, is how do we do it? And this has to do with the resources, it has to do with the maneuvers that we're going to carry out in order to win the game. Now, the very first thing that I need you guys to do in order to do this properly is to take a look at these two positions, try to evaluate it, and let me know in the comments if you'd rather be white or black, and what would be your plan, your next move. If you're not following the course, not a big deal, but if you are, let me know, that way I know how we should direct the future lessons. Now, before, assuming that you did that already, before we go over this very important position or even this one, let me show you more or less with a simpler example. So this one, for example, the question is going to be, what do I want to do? Well, if you evaluated the position, you realized you have a pass pawn, and then you want to promote it. This is how you win the game. Now, the question is, of course, how do I do it? And then if you have been training tactics the right way, if your intuition is developed properly, you're going to think of obstruction. So f6, threatening to take or advance and promote. And of course, if they take, now h5 and the king cannot get to it. Of course, there are principles here like the rule of the square, but ultimately, guys, with calculation, you're able to do this. So again, h5, the king gets to us, and then forget about winning the game. But if we do f6, then h5, there's no way the king can get to us because we created an obstruction. Now, this is simple. Now, let's get to the more complicated positions. Now, this one, I hope that you spent enough time. If you didn't, do like we did in one of our recent videos, guys, where we talked about giving ourselves 5, 10, 15 minutes to work on the position. Now here, if we get to this position, guys, our intuition should tell us this is a critical position. We need to take a moment and evaluate the position. So first thing that should come to mind is the white pieces have a very powerful knight on c5. They have two rooks doubled on the b file, which is open. But more than having rooks on the open file, don't forget, we want them to be on open files to be able to penetrate to the 7th rank. And ultimately, the best thing is doubling up the rooks on the 7th rank. And of course, we also have to consider, guys, the things that are not so good. So we have doubled pawns, isolated. But then for the black pieces, even though it's not as nice as the white position, we gotta acknowledge that they have the pearl bishops. And even though they never castled, they were able to do the rook lift and activate the rook, right? And we also like this pressure that we're putting on h3. Now, with all of that taken into consideration, guys, it doesn't seem like there's a quick win for the white pieces here. However, again, if you have been training tactics the way that we have discussed in this course, if your intuition is developed properly, you're going to start perceiving these tactical patterns. Number one, we know that we want to penetrate to b8. That would be pinning the queen, that would be winning. And then if we combine that with something that we have talked about so many times, if we have a knight on a very good square, guys, the knight by itself is not going to win the game. Just by putting the knight to c5, we do not win the game. So we want to think, how can the knight help us? And we look at the corresponding squares. Now, it's not only about the squares that we are controlling with the knight, but also the squares that we could control in 2 moves. Very important. So when I start with one of my beginner students, we talk about that. They're getting really good about the knight, especially the backward moves, right? So going back with the knight. But at some point, just as easy as you guys identify squares the knight could jump to, you gotta train yourself to identify squares you could get to in 2 moves. Like this knight, just by looking at it, you should know that it could get here in 2 moves. So indirectly, I'm protecting or controlling that square. I could get to f2 in 2 moves, and so on. But that's something that we have already talked about, and we're going to continue to reinforce in other lessons. Now, here the most important thing is b8 is a square my knight is controlling. So when I combine that idea of penetrating to the back rank with this, plus my queen being able to get to h8, this is going to unleash a tactical combination. But again, guys, you're not going to get here unless you evaluated the position, unless you have been training your tactics properly, and unless you have developed your ability to visualize, to calculate. And yes, we have had lessons for all of those. Now, with this new piece of information, guys, feel free to give yourself another 5-10 minutes if you're not lazy. And let's try to calculate and look for the candidate moves. Now, even if you didn't find it, I hope that you guys considered e6 as a candidate move. Why? Well, knight d7, as nice as it might seem, wouldn't work if the bishop is controlling d7. So we got to think again of interference or obstruction, right? So e6 is going to be the move. And now I'm threatening to actually do rook b8, rook takes, queen takes, and then knight d7. Now, the question is, and by the way, it's going to apply also if they do rook e6, obstruction. Now, the question is, what if after e6, the bishop takes on e6? Now, at this point, I know this is already getting a little bit annoying, me getting back to you guys, continuing to repeat the same things, but now that you have a new piece of information, if you didn't find it before, try to find it now. Force yourself to calculate, guys. Don't be there looking at me now and waiting for me to tell you everything. Try to challenge yourself. Pause the video every time you feel necessary and calculate. So again, e6 is the move. Now we gotta calculate if bishop e6 and also if pawn e6. And we're going to start using more and more this idea of the stepping stone method, right? So little by little, let's get to it. So number one, e6, let's take a look, guys, at f takes e6. Now, if f takes e6, that one is the easiest. Rook b8 again. I know that I said it already, but it doesn't hurt to visualize it one more time. Knight d7, king moves, we take on b8. This has to be completely winning. Now, the other variation, which I think could be a little bit more challenging to consider or to find, is after e6, what if the bishop takes? And guys, think twice before ignoring what your intuition is telling you. We have said it so many times, if your pieces are active, tactics are going to be in the air. Now, again, the key squares are going to be b8, d7, but also h8. We talked about our queen being able to go to h5 and then to h8. So after e6, bishop e6, queen h5, we're threatening to go to h8. Now, if they do something like rook h6, preventing us from going to h8, then we have queen e5. And how is this so important? Well, now I continue to support that b8 penetration. But guys, this is a move. You're not going to find it unless you are able to visualize clearly. That's why it's so important that we train our tactics, our ability to visualize, and so on. So again, e6, bishop takes, queen h5, trying to get to h8. And now if they do king g8, of course this is hanging. We got to realize that. But more importantly, if rook h6, we got queen e5 and we are already winning. Now, assuming that you guys are not already confused and overwhelmed, let me ask you this. Let's push it one more move. And this has to do with two other things that we have talked about. And guys, sorry if this is hard to follow, but if you have been following this course in order, this shouldn't be that difficult. Now, those other two things are, number one, the stepping stone method. Number two, whenever you visualize, whenever you calculate a variation, after you calculate everything and everything is settled, try to push yourself to calculate one more move. After everything is done in your head, push yourself to calculate one more move after everything is done. And it's going to help you a lot. So the question is going to be after, again, e6, bishop takes, queen h5. If they actually go king g8 and we take on e7, what if bishop h3? Don't forget, by then, the rook is pinning the pawn, the bishop is putting pressure on g2. Well, at this point, guys, and I don't expect you to find this, but at this point, the move is pawn to f5, hitting the rook and interfering with the queen. And then after rook g2, king h1, we're going to be completely winning. We have the advantage. But of course, this is something that we have to visualize clearly because many of us might just not go into this variation because of our king being attacked on g2. But at that point, bishop and rook only is not going to do anything to us. We're up a bishop, that king is not as safe, and our other rook could even come to the 7th rank afterwards. So guys, with that said, let's do it on the board. e6, if we have pawn takes, well, this is easy. And then queen takes, knight d7, that's a fork. And let me actually activate the engine here. And according to the engine, guys, this is already almost 5 points of advantage. This is a lot. Now, if instead after e6 we got bishop e6, we have queen h5. If rook h6, then queen e5, and guys, this is just already winning. And then finally, if king g8, we got rook e7, bishop h3, and then, well, look, they're giving queen g6. Queen g6, f takes g6, and then rook bb7. Now, how about f5? I thought f5, well, f5 works too. And then if rook g2, king h1, yeah, this is completely winning. But look, the engine is actually giving something better. It's saying take the rook and then double up on the 7th rank. Very, very powerful. So there you go, guys. Either way, you're going to be fine. But again, in order for us to get to this point, we got to be able to evaluate the position first and then look at what we're putting pressure on, what our pieces could do working together. Or in other words, which of our pieces might be involved and how we can make them work in harmony. Now, with this done, there's only one more position that we have to look at, and that's going to be this one. Now, this one, I'm going to leave it to you guys as homework. So, and of course, I'm going to leave the answer in the description. So try to evaluate the position. It is the white pieces to move, and then try to look for the question, what do I need to do after you evaluate the position? And then finally, of course, how do I do it? So with that said, guys, let me know in the comments. I hope that you actually gave me all of that feedback in the comments for me to know where we are at this point in the course. And I will see you in our next lesson.